The wail of sirens carved through the freezing November air like a scalpel. Red and blue lights strobed across the flawless black paint of a dark Mercedes S-Class. Inside sat a man 2 weeks from a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the land. By morning, the steel biting into his wrists would end a barrier-breaking career in ruins. This is not merely a story about a badge and a gavel. It is the precise, merciless autopsy of a political assassination, engineered so cleanly that a man's legacy was destroyed before he could even take the oath. Rain slicked Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C., turning the asphalt into a river of liquid gold under the street lamps. It was 1:27 a.m. on Tuesday, November 12th. Inside the hushed cabin of his Mercedes, Judge Nathaniel Brooks pressed his fingers to his temples, listening to the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers. At 54, he stood at the absolute pinnacle of the American legal profession. A federal appellate judge with a mind like tempered steel, he had just survived a brutal 14-hour murder board with White House counsel. In 13 days, he would face the Senate Judiciary Committee for his Supreme Court confirmation. He was exhausted. His silk tie hung loose at his throat. The briefcase on the passenger seat held thousands of pages of constitutional precedent. Nathaniel Brooks had spent his life playing by the rules, building a reputation of unshakable composure and unimpeachable integrity. As a black man who had risen through the Ivy League and the federal judiciary, he carried the weight of every expectation and every doubt. He signaled and turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street in Chevy Chase, Maryland, 3 miles from home, from his wife Claire, from a glass of scotch and silence. Then the rearview mirror exploded with light. Nathaniel's pulse jumped. He checked his speed, 32 in a 35. Both hands moved to the wheel at 10 and 2. He pulled over smoothly, killed the engine, and rolled down the window. Freezing air rushed in. A spotlight pinned his side mirror. Boots crunched on wet gravel. "Evening, officer," Nathaniel said, voice calm and low. He kept his hands visible. The officer stepped into the light. His name tag read, Knox. Officer Jared Knox was young, thick-necked, chewing gum like he wanted to hurt it. His hand rested on his holstered weapon. "License, registration, proof of insurance, now." "They're in the glove compartment, Officer Knox. I'm going to reach across slowly. I didn't ask for commentary. Just hand them over." Nathaniel kept his movements deliberate. He passed the documents through the window. Knox took them without looking at the name. He stepped back and keyed his radio. "Dispatch, male suspect, matching the Bethesda armed robbery description. Dark sedan, requesting backup." Nathaniel's blood went cold. "Officer, there's been a mistake. I'm a federal appellate judge. I'm coming from the White House. This is my car. Step out of the vehicle." "Excuse me? Step out, now." Knox drew his weapon and leveled it at Nathaniel's chest. The world narrowed to the black circle of the muzzle. Nathaniel opened the door slowly, hands raised. Freezing rain soaked his shirt instantly. He stepped onto the asphalt. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "Officer Knox, you are making a serious mistake." Knox grabbed Nathaniel's right arm and wrenched it upward with savage force. Pain detonated in his shoulder. His chest slammed against the wet roof of the Mercedes. Cold steel ratcheted around his wrists, biting deep. "Stop resisting!" "I'm not resisting." 2 more cruisers screamed to a stop. 4 more officers spilled out. Knox shoved Nathaniel to his knees in a puddle. Icy water soaked through his suit pants. Porch lights flicked on up and down the street. Silhouettes filled windows. Nathaniel knelt in the rain, wrists bound, the cold crawling into his bones. He looked up. For one frozen second, the streetlight caught Knox's face. There was no adrenaline, no fear, only cold, quiet satisfaction. Across the street, a dark SUV idled. A tiny red light blinked from a high-definition lens. The trap had closed perfectly. By 6:22 a.m. the next morning, Nathaniel Brooks was no longer a respected jurist. He was the main character in a national scandal. He had been released at 3:45 a.m. after a frantic call from Captain Leonard Pike, who blamed a dispatch error and a rookie's overzealousness. Nathaniel had driven home in silence, stripped off the ruined suit, and sat in his study until the sky turned gray. Then his phone rang. Lena Vasquez, his chief of staff, sounded terrified. "Nathaniel, turn on Channel 4, now." He grabbed the remote. His stomach dropped. It was not blurry cell phone footage. It was heavily edited dash cam video. The clip began exactly when Nathaniel opened his door. The audio had been replaced. Instead of Knox's unprovoked escalation, the tape played fabricated sound. Nathaniel supposedly snarling, "Do you know who I am? I don't have to listen to you." Then the video cut to him being slammed against the car while Knox shouted, "Stop resisting! Stop reaching for your waist!" The anchors looked grave. Breaking this morning, Supreme Court nominee Judge Nathaniel Brooks was detained overnight after a combative encounter with police. Sources say he became belligerent and physically resistant during a routine traffic stop. Lena's voice trembled. "They doctored it. We both know they did." By 9:10 a.m., the White House had gone silent. The president's press secretary canceled the morning briefing. Blood was in the water. In a K Street office, Grant Holloway, Nathaniel's communications director, paced in front of a whiteboard. "FOIA requests for body cam footage take weeks. This tape hit a dark money political blog 4 hours after the arrest. Someone handed it to them." At 11:05 a.m., the architect of the destruction stepped to the microphones on the Capitol steps. Senator Preston Langford, silver-haired chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, looked appropriately somber. "The footage we all saw this morning is deeply disturbing," Langford said. "The Supreme Court requires absolute restraint and respect for law enforcement. What I saw was a man who believes he is above the law." A reporter shouted, "Judge Brooks's team claims the video is edited. Will you wait for a full investigation?" Langford smiled thinly. "The camera doesn't lie. The committee cannot proceed with a standard hearing while the nominee is under criminal investigation for resisting arrest. I am moving the hearings up. We will hold a special session on the character and fitness of Judge Nathaniel Brooks. He will testify under oath about his behavior on that asphalt." Back in his study, Nathaniel watched the press conference with icy clarity. "This was never about a traffic stop," he said, quietly to Lena on the phone. "Pull everything on Officer Jared Knox, financials, phone records, commanding officers. A beat cop doesn't leak edited dash cam to a national blog in 4 hours. Somebody paid him. We have 5 days until the hearing." "Let Langford turn it into a circus," Nathaniel said. "If they want a trial, I'll give them one." The Dirksen Senate office building was a zoo. Camera flashes exploded as Nathaniel, flanked by Lena Vasquez and Grant Holloway, walked the marble corridor. Protesters screamed on both sides. Nathaniel wore a charcoal suit, posture perfect, hiding the deep bruises still coloring his right shoulder. Inside room 226, the air felt thick enough to choke on. Senator Preston Langford sat at the center of the curved mahogany dais, like a judge in his own courtroom. "The committee will come to order." Nathaniel took the single witness chair in the center of the floor. Langford skipped every courtesy. "Judge Brooks, last Tuesday the American people watched what happens when you are stripped of your robes. You became hostile. You fought with law enforcement. You demanded special treatment. With respect, Senator, the premise of that question rests on a fabricated video. I was courteous. I was compliant. I was assaulted." "Assaulted?" Langford leaned back in theatrical shock. "We have the police report. Officer Knox states you aggressively reached into your vehicle, ignored commands, and forced him to draw his weapon. Officer Knox lied. A murmur rolled through the gallery. "That is a serious accusation," Langford said, "especially since we now have new testimony." He gestured. Staff distributed thick folders. A sworn affidavit from Officer Caleb Finch, who arrived as backup. He states under oath that he heard you threaten to end Officer Knox's career. We also located a sealed complaint from your time as an assistant district attorney 22 years ago. Another combative altercation with courthouse security. A pattern, Judge Brooks. Nathaniel's hands tightened on the edge of the table. The 22-year-old complaint had been a trivial misunderstanding over a lost ID badge. Langford was weaponizing it with surgical skill. "You are constructing a fiction, Senator. Have you subpoenaed the raw, unedited audio from the cruisers?" "We don't need to," Langford replied smoothly. The precinct's tech division reported fatal corruption of the raw hard drives that night. Tragic technical failure. The only surviving footage is what the public has already seen. Nathaniel stared at him. "You are a former prosecutor, Senator. You know hard drives do not spontaneously corrupt in selective ways. You know a patrol officer does not have the clearance to scrub a precinct server. You are presiding over a cover-up." "Watch your tone," Langford snapped, gavel cracking. "You are not in your courtroom. You are in mine." What a hollow courtroom it is. Behind Nathaniel, Lena's phone buzzed. She read an encrypted message from the private investigator they had hired, scribbled on a yellow pad, and slid it in front of him. Nathaniel glanced down. Officer Jared Knox's sister works for a PAC funded by Vanguard Horizon. Vanguard's chairman is Langford's brother-in-law. $250,000 wired to an offshore account controlled by Knox's sister. Yesterday. Nathaniel looked up, the pieces locked into place with sickening precision. "Senator Langford," he said, voice dropping to a dangerous register. "Since we are discussing patterns and sudden affidavits, let us discuss Vanguard Horizon. Let us discuss the $250,000 wired to an offshore account tied to Officer Jared Knox exactly 24 hours ago." Langford's face drained of color. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered on the dais. The hearing room detonated. Cameras flashed in a continuous blinding storm. Reporters shouted over one another. Langford slammed the gavel again and again, voice cracking. "This committee is in recess. Clear the room." Within minutes, the confrontation was looping on every network. The narrative had fractured. Half the country still saw an angry judge. A growing number now looked directly at Senator Preston Langford. Back in the war room on K Street, the air tasted of adrenaline and burnt coffee. Grant Holloway paced. "We kicked the hornet's nest. CNN is running the Vanguard connection. Fox is calling you desperate. Langford's office claims his brother-in-law has zero operational control and is threatening a defamation suit." Harlan Crow, the private investigator, dropped a thick folder on the table. "Langford is lying. Vanguard Horizon is a dark money slush fund. 3 days ago, they paid a security consulting fee to a Delaware shell company. That shell wired the exact same amount, $250,000, to a Cayman account registered to Knox's sister." Nathaniel studied the numbers. "Can we authenticate these for federal court?" Crow shook his head. "I acquired them extra-legally. A friend at a clearinghouse owed me. If you hand them to the DOJ, they'll demand the warrant. There isn't one. The Attorney General is Langford's ally. He'll bury it and arrest me for cyber trespass." Nathaniel exhaled. The law he had spent his life defending had become a shield for the men trying to destroy him. By 8 p.m., the counterattack accelerated. Nathaniel returned home to find Claire in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. She ended the call, eyes blazing. "That was my managing partner. The IRS just opened a full multi-year audit on my client accounts. The federal grant for the inner-city literacy charity I chair was frozen by the Senate Appropriations Committee pending routine review." Nathaniel felt the air leave his lungs. They were no longer coming only for his career. They were burning his entire life to the ground. "They're trying to starve us out," he whispered. "If I don't withdraw, Langford will destroy your firm and the charity." Claire gripped his forearms, voice fierce. "We do not back down to thugs in expensive suits. You have worked your entire life for this seat. If you step down, they win. They prove a black man can be publicly lynched by a dirty cop and a corrupt politician, and no one will stop them. You fight them, Nathaniel. You burn them to the ground." He looked into his wife's eyes and felt the exhaustion replaced by lethal clarity. "Okay," he said quietly. "Then we stop playing defense." His phone vibrated. Lena's voice was tight. "Officer Caleb Finch just called my burner. He's terrified. Langford is tying up loose ends. He wants to meet. Now." The rain had returned. A freezing, miserable drizzle. It was 2:08 a.m. Nathaniel sat in the passenger seat of Harlan Crow's unmarked Ford Explorer in the cracked parking lot of an abandoned strip mall in Alexandria, Virginia. Lena sat in the back. They waited in silence, windows fogging. Headlights swept across the asphalt. A battered Honda Civic parked 3 spaces away. A man in a dark hoodie stepped out into the rain and slid into the back of the Explorer. Officer Caleb Finch was 30, pale, reeking of panic and stale cigarettes. "Turn your phones off," Finch said immediately. "Take the batteries out. Knox has a Stingray. He can track locations. That's how they found you on Connecticut Avenue. They tracked your car from the White House." Nathaniel powered down his phone. "Take a breath, Officer Finch. You're safe here." "I'm not safe anywhere," Finch hissed. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. It's not just Langford. It's Captain Pike. It's the Union. They're all getting a cut of the Vanguard money." "Tell us exactly what happened that night," Lena said softly, clicking on a small analog recorder. Finch stared at the recorder, swallowed. Then the words poured out. "Knox got the call on his personal burner. We were told a high-value target needed to be humbled on camera. They gave him your plates. When you pulled over, the arrest was pure theater. The dash cam was real, but the audio was completely wiped and redubbed by a private tech contractor Vanguard hired. They erased the original files from the precinct server the next morning." "And the affidavit you signed?" Nathaniel asked. "Captain Pike handed it to me. Said if I signed, I'd get my detective shield in 6 months. If I didn't, I'd be assigned to narcotics without backup. Then a guy in a tailored suit left a duffel bag with $50,000 on my kitchen table. He had a Vanguard Horizon pin on his lapel." "Can you identify him?" Crow asked from the driver's seat. "I didn't get a name, but 2 nights ago at a bar, Knox got drunk and started bragging. He didn't know I was wearing a wire. He admitted to the offshore account. He named Captain Pike. He even bragged that a sitting U.S. senator personally guaranteed he'd never see a day in court." Finch reached into his hoodie pocket and held up a small black USB drive. "Knox admitted everything. The whole thing. Take it. But you don't release this until I have written immunity from a federal judge outside this circuit, and my family is on a plane somewhere they can't be found." "You have my word," Nathaniel said, taking the drive. It felt heavier than it should. At 6:18 a.m. the next morning, Nathaniel sat in his study reviewing legal precedent for expedited witness protection when the television flashed a breaking news banner. A local anchor stood in the rain in front of mangled wreckage on Route 50. "Tragedy early this morning. An off-duty police officer was killed in a hit-and-run authorities are describing as horrific. Police have identified the victim as Officer Caleb Finch. Investigators found several empty liquor bottles and a significant quantity of illegal narcotics in the vehicle. The department suspects he was driving under the influence when his vehicle struck a concrete embankment at high speed. The coffee cup slipped from Nathaniel's hand and shattered on the hardwood. They hadn't just killed him. They had planted drugs and alcohol to destroy his credibility, even in death. The USB drive on the desk was no longer evidence. It was the last testament of a murdered man. Nathaniel's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered without speaking. "It's a tragedy about Officer Finch," Senator Preston Langford's smooth voice purred. "A troubled young man. The stress of the badge can push people to dark places. Withdraw your nomination by noon, Judge Brooks. Or I promise you, the next tragic accident will hit much closer to home." The line went dead. Nathaniel lowered the phone. The rules of the courtroom no longer applied. If he was going to survive, he had to stop playing like a judge. He had to start playing like the man they had tried to destroy. By 8 a.m., the Reynolds, Brooks residence, had become a fortress of quiet, calculated motion. Nathaniel did not call the police. He did not call the Department of Justice. He turned to his wife. Claire sat at the kitchen island, laptop open, typing with the precise fury of a senior partner at one of the most powerful corporate litigation firms in the country. "They think my only weapon is a gavel," Nathaniel said. "Langford made a fatal error. He attacked your firm. He attacked the money." Claire didn't look up. "We represent 3 of the largest institutional investors in Vanguard Horizon. When I told them their political action committee is being used to bribe police officers and potentially fund assassinations, the board went nuclear. We are filing a massive civil RICO lawsuit in the Southern District of New York right now. Because it's civil, initiated by defrauded private investors, it bypasses the Attorney General entirely. It triggers an immediate injunction. By noon, federal marshals answering to the Southern District, not Washington, will be seizing Vanguard servers and freezing every offshore account tied to this." Nathaniel stopped pacing. "That cuts off Langford's wallet, but it doesn't put him in handcuffs." Harlan Crow walked in carrying the smell of rain and stale coffee. He placed a burner phone on the counter. "I found the bagman, the guy in the tailored suit who dropped the cash at Finch's house. His name is Derek Lang, risk management consultant on retainer for Vanguard. I pulled his toll records. At 4:17 a.m. this morning, his Range Rover was clocked 2 miles from the stretch of Route 50 where Finch was killed." "Lang murdered him," Nathaniel said softly. "And he's sloppy," Crow added. "He didn't expect Finch to die in a public crash. He expected him to disappear. Lang is currently hiding in a private VIP suite at the Capitol Grill on Pennsylvania Avenue. He's day drinking, waiting for a charter flight to Geneva at 4 o'clock. Nathaniel grabbed his overcoat. "Or he's not going to Geneva. He's going to sing." At 1:45 p.m., the lunch rush at the Capitol Grill was a roar of power and money. Nathaniel walked past the host stand without slowing, Harlan Crow a shadow behind him. They bypassed the main dining room and approached the private suites. Crow shoved open the heavy oak door to the Roosevelt room. Derek Lang sat alone at a circular table, a half-empty bottle of Macallan 18 in front of him. He looked up, face draining of color, as he recognized the federal judge whose life he had helped destroy. His hand darted toward his breast pocket. Crow crossed the room in 2 strides, slammed Lang against the paneled wall, and a suppressed 9mm clattered to the carpet. "Sit down," Nathaniel commanded. Crow threw Lang into a chair and pocketed the gun. "You're trespassing," Lang stammered. "I'll have you arrested." "Scream all you want, Derek," Nathaniel said, voice low and melodic. "But first, look at my phone." He slid the device across the table. On the screen was a live feed of the Kirkland filing in New York. Vanguard Horizon's assets were frozen under federal RICO statute. Marshals were seizing servers, seizing the offshore routing numbers tied to Knox and, inevitably, to Lang's consulting firm. "Langford is done," Nathaniel continued. "But right now he is desperate. Officer Finch is dead. Langford ordered you to silence him, and you ran him off Route 50. Do you really think a sitting U.S. senator is going to let the man who committed murder on his behalf board a plane to Geneva? You're the ultimate loose end. Langford is going to have you killed before you reach the tarmac. The realization hit Lang like a physical blow. The arrogant mask shattered. I didn't want to kill him, Lang whispered. Langford said to scare him, run him off the road so he'd miss the meeting. The crash happened too fast. The car flipped. I panicked. I planted the bottles and ran. Nathaniel felt a cold, sharp blade of rage and forced it down. I have a sworn, encrypted confession from the man you killed, naming everyone involved. You have one option. You walk out of here with my investigator. He will take you to a secure black site operated by the Southern District of New York. You will give them Langford. You will give them the original dash cam audio. And you will pray they offer you life without parole instead of the needle. Lang looked at Crow's dead eyes, then back to Nathaniel. He nodded slowly. Take him, Nathaniel said. I have a Senate hearing to attend. The Dirksen hearing room was packed to capacity. Protesters chanted outside, loud enough to rattle the windows. Every major network broadcast live from room 226. At exactly 3 p.m., Senator Preston Langford struck his gavel. The crack sounded like a rifle shot. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed. His bespoke suit was immaculate. He wore the confident expression of a man who believed he had already won. He had received word that Vanguard servers were secure and Finch was dead. As far as Langford knew, Nathaniel Brooks was cornered and about to deliver a humiliating withdrawal. The committee will come to order, Langford announced. Judge Brooks, the events of the past few days have been a tragedy for the American judicial system. We have seen a pattern of anger, violence, and blatant disregard for law enforcement. It is the opinion of this chair that proceeding with a Supreme Court confirmation would be an insult to the Constitution. Have you reached a decision regarding your nomination? Nathaniel sat alone at the witness table in a midnight blue suit, tie perfectly knotted. He did not look defeated. He looked like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. I have, Senator. Langford smirked. And the floor is yours, Judge. Resign with whatever dignity you have left. I am not resigning. The gallery erupted. Langford's smirk vanished. He grabbed the gavel. Order! Judge Brooks, you are under criminal investigation. I am under an orchestrated hit, Nathaniel interrupted, voice rising like thunder. And under the protections of the congressional record, granting me absolute immunity from civil defamation while seated at this table. I am submitting the following into evidence. He slammed a stack of papers onto the table. Exhibit A. A civil RICO indictment filed at 1 p.m. today in the Southern District of New York against Vanguard Horizon, freezing all assets. Exhibit B. Wire transfer records proving Vanguard Horizon, controlled by your brother-in-law, wired $250,000 to the sister of Officer Jared Knox, exactly 4 hours before I was assaulted. Shut his microphone off, Langford screamed, face purple. Clerk, cut the feed. Sergeant-at-Arms, remove this man. You cannot silence the truth, Preston, Nathaniel roared back. In the back row, Lena Vasquez sat with a heavy-duty laptop on her knees. She had anticipated this. She had hardwired Nathaniel's microphone directly into the press feeds, bypassing Senate control. Exhibit C, Nathaniel shouted over the chaos. The sworn recorded confession of Officer Caleb Finch, who was murdered at 4:17 a.m. this morning on Route 50 by a Vanguard Horizon operative named Derek Lang. Langford froze. The color drained from his face completely. He hadn't known about Lang. He thought the crash had been clean. And because I know you wiped the precinct servers, Senator, Nathaniel continued, voice echoing through millions of televisions. Because I know you believe you erased the truth of what happened to me on that asphalt. I want the American people to hear exactly what your money bought. He pulled the black USB drive from his pocket. plugged it into a small digital player, and held it to the live microphone. He pressed play. Officer Jared Knox's slurred, unmistakable voice filled the chamber. But Brooks didn't do shit. I grabbed him, slammed him on the hood. Guy was perfectly calm. Pike told me to make it look like he was reaching. Easiest 250 I ever made. Langford promised me absolute immunity. Said the judge would be ruined before the sun came up. The silence that followed was absolute and catastrophic. Every senator on the dais slowly turned to stare at Preston Langford. Journalists stopped typing, mouths open. Langford slumped back in his chair, the gavel slipping from his trembling fingers and hitting the floor. The invincible armor of Washington privilege had just been shattered on live television. "Senator Langford," Nathaniel said, voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register. "You orchestrated the assault of a federal judge. You corrupted a police department. You are complicit in the murder of an American police officer. I am not stepping down. I am taking my seat on the Supreme Court. And my very first act as a justice will be to ensure that when your federal indictments reach the appellate level, the law you so callously manipulated will offer you absolutely no mercy." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the room burst open. 4 federal marshals in tactical vests marked U.S. Marshal SDNY marched down the center aisle. Behind them walked Captain Leonard Pike in handcuffs, head lowered in disgrace. The lead marshal walked straight up the steps of the dais, bypassing Senate security. He stopped in front of Senator Preston Langford. "Senator Langford, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and federal civil rights violations. Please stand and place your hands behind your back." The gallery exploded into screams, camera shutters, and frantic shouting. Senators scrambled to distance themselves. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee was pulled to his feet. Heavy steel cuffs ratcheted around his wrists. His bespoke suit suddenly looked like a prison uniform. Nathaniel Brooks sat at the witness table, watching the architect of his destruction being led out in disgrace. He felt no joy, no triumphant vindication, only an immense, overwhelming exhaustion. He looked at his own wrists, still bruised yellow and purple from the metal that had bitten into them days earlier. He had won. He had survived the guillotine. But the innocence of his judicial philosophy was gone forever. He had learned that the law was not a shield, it was a sword, and it belonged to whoever swung it hardest. 2 weeks later, the Senate Judiciary Committee, under new and terrified leadership, voted unanimously to confirm Nathaniel Brooks to the United States Supreme Court. He was sworn in by the Chief Justice in a quiet, private ceremony. When he put on the heavy black robes, they felt different from his appellate robes. They felt like armor. He looked out the window toward the Capitol, the sky gray and unforgiving. He knew the monsters were still out there, hiding in boardrooms and police precincts. But now they had to answer to him,